It's 3 a.m. on a dock in Duloc, Louisiana. The lights on a 50-foot steel-hulled commercial boat are already on. Ice is loading, diesel is pumping. The captain is on his third coffee, reading a weather printout that says calm seas for the next 4 days. After that, a front rolls in. He has 5 days to fill the boat. That's the window. If everything goes right, this one trip will bring in between 20,000 and 30,000 pounds of red snapper at $5 to $6 a pound at the dock. That's over $100,000 of fish in the hold from a single boat on a single run. Now multiply that by the fact that the man who actually owns the right to catch those fish isn't on the boat. He's asleep in a house somewhere inland. He owns 4 boats running this exact trip this week, plus he leases his extra catch rights to other captains for another $2 a pound. By Friday, his personal take for the week is north of $1.5 million. He won't get his hands wet once. This is how the red snapper business actually works in the Gulf of Mexico, and almost none of it is what you think. To understand how a fish becomes $1 million week, you have to start with the fish itself. Red snapper is the Gulf's crown jewel. It's a bright pink reef fish that can live for almost 60 years, with the biggest ones hitting 50 pounds. It's also, pound for pound, one of the most restricted commercial fish in American waters. Here's why that matters. The total commercial quota for the entire Gulf is roughly 7 million pounds a year. Not per fisherman. For everybody. Split across 5 states and hundreds of boats. In a country of 330 million people. That's it. That's the whole cake. So when you see a 30,000-pound load coming over the rail, you're not just looking at a catch. You're looking at serious money. That haul represents a significant slice of what most commercial snapper boats land in an entire year, pulled out of the water in less than a week, by one crew of 4 or 5 guys who have been awake for most of it. That kind of scarcity turns fish into currency. And when fish is currency, a 5-day trip starts to look different. The boat leaves Duloc just before 4 a.m. The crew is 3 deckhands and a captain. The youngest is 19. The oldest is 52 and has been doing this since the Darby days, which matters because he's the reason the captain hired him. He knows the old numbers, the spots that aren't on any public map, the wrecks and artificial reefs and rock piles where red snapper stack up in the dark. They run south for 4 hours to get offshore. The continental shelf drops, and the water goes from muddy brown to green to a deep Gulf blue. Red snapper live at the edge of that drop, anywhere from 100 to 400 feet down, usually clustered around structure, oil rig legs, shipwrecks, piles of concrete rubble dumped decades ago as artificial reef. That's their world, and the fishermen know it in their bones. When they hit the first spot, the work begins. And the work is brutal. There's no romance to it. The main gear is called a bandit reel. It's a hydraulic reel bolted to the side of the boat that drops a cable straight down with a bar at the end. Off that bar dangle 10 to 30 baited hooks, depending on the rig. You load the hooks with cut squid or cigar minnows. You drop the rig 300 feet. You wait 60 seconds, you hit the switch, the hydraulic motor hauls the whole thing back up, and every hook has a red snapper on it. Then you do that again, and again, and again, You do it with your arms burning and your back aching and salt water drying in the cuts on your hands, because every 60 seconds of downtime is money you didn't make. At peak production, one bandit reel can bring up 300 pounds of fish an hour. A boat with 4 reels running hard is pulling over 1,000 pounds an hour out of the water. Somewhere around hour 10, the deck becomes a problem. Red snapper come up in a kind of shock state because of the pressure change. The air bladder swells, the eyes bulge. You have one job, which is to gut them, bleed them, ice them, and stack them in the hold before they lose value. Every fish is worth $20, $30, sometimes $50 depending on size. A single 5-foot cooler full of them is a month's rent, and the hold keeps filling. By late afternoon on day 1, they've boxed maybe 3,000 pounds. Most crews keep a running tally in their heads. At $5 a pound, that's $15,000 before dinner. Split across the crew by share after boat expenses, that's rent paid, truck payment handled, kids' school clothes bought, all before the sun goes down on day 1. The captain sleeps in 4-hour blocks. The crew sleeps less. Day 2 starts before sunrise because the forecast is closing. They push harder, drop deeper, move from spot to spot when the bite slows. By day 3, the boat is pulling 5,000 to 7,000 pounds in 24 hours, and the hold is starting to look like a bank vault made of fish. So who gets that money? That's where the story gets strange. Before 2007, it worked the way you'd expect. Whoever caught the fish sold the fish. Every commercial boat raced every other commercial boat to hit the quota before the season closed. At first, the season was months long. Then it got cut to 3 months, then 90 days. By 1995, commercial fishermen were harvesting their annual quota in just 52 days. By the early 2000s, it had been chopped into short, brutal openings of 10 days at a time, and fishermen called it the Derby. The Derby did exactly what you'd expect a Derby to do. Crews pushed boats into weather they shouldn't have been in. Prices at the dock collapsed every time the quota dumped a massive wave of fish onto the market at once. Restaurants got red snapper for 6 weeks a year and nothing for the rest. The shorter seasons led to dangerous conditions, more accidents and fatalities on the water. When you only have 10 days to make your annual income, you don't sit out a storm. So in 2007, the federal government rolled out a new system called the Individual Fishing Quota, or IFQ. The idea was simple. Instead of everyone racing for a shared pool of fish, every commercial fisherman would get a permanent percentage share of the annual quota based on how much red snapper they'd caught historically. If you caught 2% of the fish in the years before the program, you got a 2% share for life. You could fish it yourself. You could sell it. You could lease it to somebody else. And that last part is where the wealth went sideways. Because a funny thing happened once those shares became permanent property. They got bought and sold. The people with money bought up more shares, and the people without money sold theirs, and then they sold the rights to keep fishing them at all. According to a 4-month investigation by AL.com, the right to catch 77% of the annual red snapper harvest is now controlled by just 55 people. They're called sea lords by federal officials because they rent the right to fish red snapper the way a landlord rents an apartment. That investigation found that roughly $60 million has been earned since 2007 by this small group of fishermen whose boats never left port. They were paid for doing nothing except owning a piece of paper that said they were allowed to catch fish they never catch. The fishermen who actually go out on the water in the dark at 3 a.m., a lot of them don't own their own quota. They lease it from a sea lord. That lease costs them roughly $2 per pound of fish they catch. So if you reel up a snapper and sell it for $5.50 at the dock, $2 of those dollars go straight to somebody who didn't get out of bed. The rest has to cover diesel, ice, bait, food, insurance, boat maintenance, and the crew's pay. And then whatever's left is yours. If you want more stories like this, the kind that show you how industries actually work when you stop watching the highlight reel, subscribe. We dig into this stuff every week. Back on the boat. Day 4. The hold is 3/4 full. The front is still holding off. The captain is making the call whether to push for one more night or head in early to beat the weather. He checks the numbers on a waterproof tally sheet. 22,000 pounds in the ice. At the low end of current dock prices, that's roughly $110,000 of fish. At the top end, closer to $135,000. Out of that, the captain pays his boat expenses, which for a 5-day trip run around $15,000 for fuel alone, plus bait, ice, maintenance, insurance, and food. Then the quota lease, which on 22,000 pounds at $2 a pound is $44,000 straight to the Sea Lord. Then the crew share, which usually works out to the deckhands splitting somewhere between 15 and 25% of the gross. The captain takes his own cut, usually larger. The boat owner, if they're different from the captain, takes theirs. By the time the fish is money in the bank, the deckhand who hasn't slept more than 3 hours a night for 5 days is taking home between $3,000 and $7,000 for the week. That's good money. Better than most jobs you can get with a high school diploma. It's also the kind of money that doesn't come every week because there are only so many good weather windows and only so much quota to go around. Meanwhile, 100 miles inland, the Sea Lord who leased his shares to this boat collected $44,000 in the 5 days this crew was bleeding their hands on the rail. He did that across 4 boats this week. He'll do it again next week, and the week after that, until he decides to sell his shares to somebody else for several $1 million in cash, because federal quota shares have become tradable assets worth tens of thousands of dollars per share point. That's the math of $1.5 million in 5 days. It isn't a lie. It also isn't a fairy tale about the plucky fisherman. The irony is that the IFQ system worked. Red snapper populations in the Gulf have recovered to their highest levels in decades. The commercial season is open year-round for the first time in 20 years. Prices stabilized. Restaurants get American red snapper 52 weeks a year now instead of 6. Fatalities dropped sharply after the Derby ended. Federal fishery managers will tell you, with real data to back them up, that it's one of the success stories of American fisheries management. And they're not wrong. It's also true that a public resource, the fish in federal waters that belong to all of us, got handed out as permanent private shares in 2007 to whoever happened to be fishing commercially at that exact moment. The people who showed up a year late got nothing, and the people who sold their shares to move to Florida or retire turned themselves into landlords of the ocean. When the boat pulls back into Duloc at the end of day 5, the tide is running hard. The front has arrived, right on schedule. The deckhand, who's been up for most of 100 hours, hands the captain the tally sheet. The number is good. The truck from the fish house is already waiting. By tomorrow morning, the fish will be on ice in a warehouse in Alabama. By tomorrow night, it'll be on a plate in a restaurant in Atlanta, Dallas, or Nashville, served under a lemon wedge with a side of asparagus for about $34. Nobody at that table will know the man who caught it lost 5 pounds in a week from the work, or that the Sea Lord got the bigger check, or anything about the quota system, the Darby years, or the 55 people who control most of the fish. They'll just eat. So here's the question I keep circling back to. Is this a fishery success story? Or is it a quiet heist that we agreed to once and then stopped paying attention to? The science says it worked. The biology says it worked. But the money says something else. The fish are back. The supply is year-round. The people who actually go out and catch them are making a living. And 55 people own what used to belong to everybody. Tell me what you think.